Welcome to the Assembling Inclusion podcast. On this show, we feature different programs, individuals, and initiatives focused on being more inclusive of individual needs. We invite you to learn right alongside us. If you want some additional resources or access to our courses, please visit our website or follow us on social media. But for right now, let's get right to the episode. Welcome back to the Assembling Inclusion podcast. Today, we are talking all about Adaptive Reader, an educational platform that utilizes both the power of tech and humans to customize classic literature and make it accessible for all readers. We are joined by Ethan Pierce, the founder of Adaptive Reader. So, Ethan, welcome. I am just so excited to talk to you today.
Thank you so much for having me on the show.
So, I want to start off with talking about your inspiration and the motivation behind starting Adaptive Reader. So your platform is really taking classic literature, classic texts that students read in school, and it's kind of breaking it down to make it more accessible. But what was the motivation for creating this platform? Did you have something in like your personal journey that kind of inspired you to tackle this problem?
So I was one of those kids who, like many, struggled with reading growing up. I had to learn to read at the end of third grade. I failed every spelling test I think I ever took and struggled not only through K-12, but through college with undiagnosed dyslexia. And I think looking back, I'm always so grateful and feel so lucky that I had a couple of teachers starting in late middle school and through high school who, really took an interest in me and helped me go from a struggling student to getting a full scholarship to Harvard. And that feels like such a gift. But I recognize that there are so many students out there who get to middle school or high school and they're expected to have shifted from learning to read to reading to learn. And so if you're not at that grade level reading expectation, suddenly, that whole curriculum is infinitely more challenging for you to engage with. And so the goal for Adaptive Reader is the reading level that you're at right now is not indicative of your intelligence. It's not indicative of your capacity. And we want to make sure that every student is able to understand what the class is working on and able to engage in those critical thinking discussions, develop those core skills, and build confidence while also building their core literacy skills.
I was just so excited when I heard about your platform because I taught, and our listeners know, I taught middle school ELA. I was a special ed teacher though. So there were so many times that it was that critical point where the students were making that shift, and it would come to me in 6th, 7th, 8th grade, still not knowing how to read, but they were expected to tackle like A Midsummer Night's Dream and all these texts that were just so overwhelming. And it was hard to kind of break down those complex texts that my students still had access to the curriculum, but we're also still getting the reading support they needed. So I was just so excited when I saw this because there is such a need for this type of work for students, especially at like the middle school and high school level. Coming from the ELA background, I know how hooked English teachers are on their classic texts and like keeping them as is. So how does Adaptive Reader kind of achieve that balance of making the text leveled and accessible for students at different reading levels, while still preserving the complexity of the original text, the themes, the important skills and structure that teachers are working on?
Absolutely. And it's something that resonates with me. I love craft. I was an art and art history major at Harvard. So I love literature. I love words. It's so important for me that every one of these students is given exposure to the author's, original prose and poetry. And I hope that they can all develop a love for that. But there needs to be scaffolds to get to that point. We always talk about this as amplifying rather than simplifying the text. In our digital reading application, we break down the passage into the book into short passages. So these are like 150 word segments that you're looking at one time. And you can actually see the original text side by side with our gold version, which brings it down 2 to 3 grade levels, or a silver version, which brings it down 4 to 6 grade levels. We even have, for those English language learners now, they can read it in simplified Chinese or in Pashto. understand what's happening and use that to decode the English language text. So I think, for me, it always comes back to first goal, let's get students reading again, because so many of these students have given up on reading entirely. Second, let's give them the confidence to say, I understand what's going on here. I can read this. I can participate. And third, let's enable them to use that confidence and that comprehension to decode the original text. And I love this activity, actually, that teachers will do of take this one passage and compare the original text to your adapted version. What's different? What makes it challenging? And so students can start to see themselves. They see the path to being able to tackle that original text. When it comes to the process of translating these texts, and I do think of them as translations, even when we're staying in English, that's something where, we actually hire educators who have taught the text before. We call it our human in the loop. And it's so important for us to maintain quality control. We do use AI. So AI helps us to scale this process. So we built our own proprietary technology that uses 7 different literacy indexes, like the Gunn and Fogg and Flesch-Kincaid. So these are reading scores sort of similar to Lexile levels. So we actually use all of that data and those metrics to see how difficult the text is initially. And then we use AI to try and target those grade level differences. And then our teachers will go through passage by passage, make sure that the themes and core plot elements are maintained and that we're reaching that critical sort of area that we're targeting.
I like that you're bringing together the human piece and the tech piece. I feel like so often when it comes to reading technologies, it's just the tech piece. And I think it's so necessary that you're bringing in the teachers too, to say like, this is what we want to be focusing on and what we should be focusing on with the text to make sure that it's coming out the way it needs to come out for the students. I appreciate the overall approach because I feel like that was something I always did manually in the classroom. I remember reading, Agatha Christie with my 7th graders who were reading at a 2nd or 3rd grade reading level, who just were so engaged in listening to the story, but when presented it independently, it was really challenging. So I love the idea of this is the original text, this is the adaptive text, side by side. You could see and kind of go back and forth between the two. That has to be, I know that would have been helpful for my students to get that basic understanding, then dive into the complexity. So I love that the platform has that built in.
I think we do really think about it, just like you're saying, as that zone of proximal development, right? These adaptations are that center ring of a student's independent reading level. And then when you come together as a class, when the teacher is there to read it aloud to you and help bridge to that original text with that complex syntax and that foreign vocabulary, yes, let's have every student working with the original text and getting that exposure.
It's a great balance. I can just see that's working really well in an inclusion classroom. And I know there's a lot more push for, having everybody together as there should be. But it's a great way then to have everybody kind of reading at a level that works for them, but then coming together and still be able to have those meaningful discussions because you do have an understanding of what's happening in the text. I did want to ask about one piece of the technology. So you said as they're actively reading, they can toggle between the different levels of the presented text?
Yes, exactly.
I like that. So the student can say on their own then, okay, I may have started on the quote unquote lowest level or the most below grade level, and I'm feeling more comfortable so I can bump it up myself.
Yeah, I think student agency is super important. And this comes from conversations that we've had. We've had 85 interviews with English teachers, reading interventionists, IEP specialists over the past year, trying to understand what this technology should look like in their classroom. And overwhelmingly, I think we've heard that student dignity is really important. So, for example, I'm not sure if I mentioned this, but all of our texts are actually available as print-on-demand paperbacks in all of our languages. And the cover looks exactly the same. So it's not like one kid is getting a cover that says, oh, hey, this is the super easy level, or hey, this is the Vietnamese version. But we really hear from educators that regardless of whether or not it's on our digital application where they can actively toggle between those languages, or it's one of our books, that Spanish student should have the agency to say, no, I want to work with and struggle with the English language tests. We shouldn't be making assumptions up or down of where these students should be going. And also, how do we make sure that we're challenging each of these students and pushing them to make sure that they're actively engaging in their own process of growth? That's one of the hardest parts from sort of a pedagogical perspective is how do we maintain that balance of agency and, making sure that we're pushing student growth. That's something that's really important to us.
I absolutely love that. Especially it's a critical age to do that too. That's the age where they start to really learn more about themselves as a learner. I mean, they have an understanding generally, but like they're really starting to push for more of that agency themselves. And I totally forgot about the paper books. I was going to ask you about that. That's so great that they look exactly the same on the outside, because I've seen ones that they're like so different and it's so standoutish in a classroom that I like that if you just look at the students as a whole, they all have the same like cover. I love that so much.
I think those little design things are so key. So I mentioned earlier those passages, those 150 word segments. So we actually have those numbers in the margins of the paperbacks too. So you as a teacher can say, everyone go to passage 47, and the student who's reading it in Pashto or simplified Chinese or Spanish is at exactly the same spot as the student who's reading the original English language text. And, sort of looking forward, we recently added QR codes to the backs of the books. So the student with their phone there at home or in the classroom can pull that up. They can jump right to the same passage that they're working with the text, and they can see that in different versions, different levels. And then in the near future, they'll actually be able to listen to it.
Oh, that is awesome. The continuity is just so perfect because the little things that happen in a classroom, just even like they're on page 13 and for them it's page 18. Students get like, why are they on this page and I'm on this page? Do they have more pages than me? It was always an issue. There's so much thought into that process and making sure it's as inclusive and as discreet as a student wants it to be for themselves.
I mean, as one of those kids who I was in labs, I know how much of education is psychological. And so a big focus for us is how do we preserve student dignity, even as we offer differentiation?
It's clear how much thought went into that process. And I want to ask about specifically, how do you choose what novels and plays and classic texts to adapt? I know there's a wide range of core texts that I think are taught throughout different grade levels, but is there a specific process for deciding, which one is next?
So we're a very new company. I started working on this full-time myself last July. We're moving really quickly. Also, we're trying to maintain really high quality control standards as we add novels. So we're doing that slowly. I think our first set of novels, we can take any novel or play that's in the public domain. So a quick sort of test for our audience out there, if you're wondering what that is, there's some nuance here, but generally anything that was published before 1928 is always in the public domain in the US. There are some texts that were published later that are also in the public domain, but that first set of 25 novels, those are really classroom classics where just from a volume perspective, we see those in an overwhelming number of US high schools. And now as we continue to add more and more novels, we're looking at that frequency, but we're also taking cues from our partner schools in terms of what they're requesting. And I think a big push right now is looking at world literature. So I think a lot of the classic canonical literature that's in most schools right now is very Eurocentric or was originally written in English. And so how do we include more texts that were written in other languages that have more diverse voices, especially so those English language learners or those students who have a different cultural background find something that resonates for them.
It's great that you started off with kind of the key texts that seem to be used the most frequently. And as I was going through the list on your website, all of them at this point were taught in both my districts that I worked in. But I know there is a push for bringing in more world literature as opposed to just those key authors and those key texts. So it's nice that you're looking to make those, adaptations in the future. As the curriculum expands, then this will also expand so teachers can kind of still pull from, these resources as well. So overall, I know you've worked with a lot of different teachers and students and different specialists within the educational space, but what are some like testimonials or success stories that you heard from educators, from students who have used Adaptive Reader in the classroom? What do you think has been the biggest successes so far?
I love the notes that I get, especially from teachers that we've never spoken to, teachers that we haven't had one of those longer conversations with. And they're just reaching out and they're saying, like, oh my goodness, I have a mixed, for me, especially like those mixed classes. And I think there's a wonderful movement to have more inclusive classes that have a very wide range of learning needs and the ability to make sure every student has a text, that paperback book that looks like everyone else's, and they're able to grapple with that and understand what's going on. And then also we have students in Thailand who are using our leveled English texts as they're in their English immersion classrooms. And so students are able to do it at multiple reading levels. So it's really fun just to see how folks are taking this tool and adapting it unintended to their own needs. And I can't wait to hear more of those stories.
I'm sure it has. Just even from my experiences as an educator, I could just imagine the powerful outreach that this would have. My immediate response when I had heard about Adaptive Reader was I want to text all my English co-teachers that I used to work with and be like, we didn't have to like suffer for so long with me handwriting and manually writing in like summaries to help the students while we were reading in class. And we could have done so much more in class because the students would have had a understanding at their own level and would have felt more confident. And I could just imagine the impact that this is having on classrooms who have been using it around the world. It's just really incredible that this exists now. I am kind of sad that I'm not in the classroom anymore.
Oh my goodness, thank you so much. And please text them. We're a very mission-oriented young company. We haven't taken those big venture dollars that can sometimes push you to grow in ways that aren't always helpful for students. So we're really relying on educators to spread the word about this. And also, I'll say, please email me to, like, I constantly say, I'm on a listening tour when I'm in any of these conversations, because I want to know what isn't meeting the needs of your students. Like, where's the friction point? What could we be doing better? So message away. If you go to adaptivereader.com, there's a contact us. I try and read as many of those educator emails as I can and respond as well.
And I will make sure to link that in the show notes too, so that anybody listening can go into our, description, or if you're reading the transcript right now, it'll be at the bottom of the transcript as well. So you could just go right there to the website. You had talked a little bit about the future plans, about the QR code and the read aloud, but what are some other future plans or ideas that you have for Adaptive Reader, or just in general, what do you envision as the future of the company?
So I was recently at NALBA, which is a conference focused on bilingual education. And we spoke with a school system there that is dual language in English and Lakota. And so that was just so cool. We actually spun up a version of Frankenstein in Lakota. And when I think about the power of AI, I think that's this really exciting thing where not only can we be helping struggling readers and emerging bilinguals, we can actually also help people preserve their home language. We had a conversation with faculty and students at Amherst College a few weeks ago, and I had a student who had come to the US and 10 years old from Afghanistan. And she said to me, if I had had this resource, then I could have preserved my home language. She's like, I'm taking this home. I'm giving this to my younger siblings. And I was like, wow, that's so powerful. So the idea that, not only can we be helping with these very common world languages, but that no language should be too small for us to support, and that AI can help us bring that sort of equality. And even further, that when we talk about Spanish, for example, there are so many dialects of Spanish, right? Spanish in Spain has like a whole different verb conjugation than Spanish in Latin America, or Chinese, right? Everyone in mainland China reads simplified Chinese, but someone speaking Cantonese and someone speaking Mandarin, same exact writing, couldn't understand one another. So how can we use the power and potential of AI to offer that additional level of dialect personalization that helps make this even more accessible for more students?
It's so great that you have that kind of mission to, like you said, that no language dialect is too small. Because I feel like, and I've worked with a lot of different ed tech companies in my role and just in my outside work. And a lot of times they go with like the key main large scale languages. And I just appreciate that you're, using AI in such a positive way to really make sure that everyone's language that they speak can be preserved within these texts. And then my last question is really a broad one. For schools, educators that want to get involved with Adaptive Reader, what resources or support do you offer them to help them integrate the books, the tools, the adaptive reading into their classrooms?
Yeah, so I think first thing I'll say, if you go to Adaptive Reader, all of our core Shakespeare texts, so we have 6 of our most common Shakespeare plays, they're always free. They will always be free for educators, all of our levels and languages. We also try and rotate a couple of novels each semester. So it's important for us from an equity perspective that we're offering resources that everyone can include in their classroom. I think looking forward, we're exploring ways where we can have teacher sidekicks and other information and materials that go alongside this content. So I'd love to hear from anyone in the audience that, like, what should that look like? What would make a big difference and have a great impact for you? So trying to balance their, having our team focus on adding more novels and more languages, but also what are all of the great supplemental materials that will make a difference as you use these in the classroom. And then finally, we have a really low-cost, flat-rate digital license. It covers your entire school, and they offer professional development sections as part of that license. So that's a great way for educators to learn about what are some of the methods that I can use within my class with a mix of IEPs and general education students to make sure every student feels included and challenged. I think it's a growth area for us to learn how to better support each educator and each school as they support their students, but it's something that's super important to us.
From the equity perspective, I appreciate I went on the website and I saw some of the ones that were freely available, and just the ease of being able to go in as an educator and see this is what it's going to look like, even if I'm not teaching that text. And, I might be teaching another one or ordering the paperback copies. At least I feel like it's all up front and present. Like, I know what it's going to look like. I can try it out and see if it works with my students. Like, that's just a game changer because so many things are just locked down and it has an extremely high price point. And the people who need it the most can't get it because the funding isn't there. So I appreciate that there's like a commitment to keeping some things free constantly and to having that lower price point to support, access for all students. So the platform is amazing within itself, but that's also a really huge piece of education that's so hard is the funding and access.
1,000%. And I think that the last little plug that I'll put there is with our focus on English language learners as well, most of our schools can actually use Title III federal funding for that digital license. That's $900 million. It's renewed annually. It doesn't have to come out of your school or district budget. There are actually these federal funds that you can quickly apply for to cover the cost of this. And I'll note it is on our website, but for smaller schools or schools that would struggle to pay for this financially, send us an email. We never want pricing to be the barrier. Super important with us.
That is fantastic. That's a great note to end on. And I will make sure to include the website, the contact info, all of everything we talked about today in the show notes for everybody. But Ethan, I want to thank you so much for joining us today, for sharing everything about Adaptive Reader. I greatly appreciate, on a personal level, on a professional level, everything that you're doing to make reading more accessible. So thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you so much for having me on the show. This was fantastic. It was a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Assembling Inclusion podcast. I hope the information in this episode taught you something new gave you a new idea, or showcased a new perspective. If you liked the episode, feel free to leave us a review or comment. If you have a recommendation for an individual or an organization who would make a great guest, you can message us or send us an email at assemblinginclusion@gmail.com. See you next time.